My name is Maury. I'm from the USA. Years ago, I worked in a home for older people as a nurse. I had the night shift. We were together drinking coffee on the second floor. All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang, so we thought a client had fallen. We decided that I would take the second floor and my colleague would take the first. Maybe we could find out what happened. While my colleague walked down the stairs, I looked at the monitor, which was on the second floor, and I saw someone in the department on the ground floor. He was inside the closed apartment. You could walk in over there, but you needed a code to get out. People with dementia lived there. We watched for a while, and the guy was stuck, he couldn't get out. We decided to go inside a room on the second floor of one of our clients because you needed a special key to go inside. We thought that was safer. We explained to her what was going on. She was perfectly capable of understanding the situation, and of course, we called 112. I explained the situation, and they told me they would come right away. I called my husband, who also had the night shift as a security guard in another town not too far away from us. He was just talking with the cops while I called 112 and said they were on their way. When I hung up, I looked outside and saw that guy climbing out the window. So I called back. They asked if something had changed. The police arrived, and we did a walk with them throughout the whole building. The guy broke the door in the kitchen. His stuff to break the door was there on the ground. The police couldn't really do much. I don't even know if they found the guy. Later that day, we heard that they were riding around the building 2 hours before the guy went in, and the guy had walked all over the ground floor, all while we were having our coffee on the second floor. That's a pretty scary thought. The next day, I had one more night shift. Though I don't have that much to fear, it was still pretty scary. So I asked if I could bring my 2 dogs. We had 2 golden at the time, and they were actually okay with that. So I brought them with me the next night. Nothing happened. The dogs walked with me the whole night, and of course, I let them outside now and then to do their thing. The other night, 2 other colleagues had the night shift, and guess what? They came back. They had robbed the safe. I always thought that the guy we had was just looking around to see if he could get away, but they had planned to come back for the safe the next night. But I'm guessing the 2 golden scared them off. I wouldn't go inside if there were 2 dogs like that either if I didn't know them. Later on, I always brought my dogs if I ever did the night shift over there. Most colleagues would be happy if they worked with me because they felt safe with the dogs, and so did I. The funny thing was that the dogs knew the route we always walked. After a few times, I didn't even put their leash on, they just knew. If we needed to help a client, they just waited in the hallway until I was done. A few clients knew it because I told them, knowing that they loved dogs. So when they needed our help, the dogs went with us in their apartment. Both the dogs and clients loved that. This happened multiple years back when I was around the age of 12. I was an only child, and back then, my family only had 1 car, which my dad would usually take to work each weekday. This meant any time my mom had to go somewhere while he was at work, she would either have to walk or hitchhike. Now, it should be mentioned that back then, hitchhiking was a lot more socially acceptable. Plus, at the time, we lived in a decently small town where, for the most part, everyone knew everyone. From what I can recall, this took place on a Thursday. My dad had dropped off my mom and me at the grocery store on his way to work. This, of course, meant we would have to find a ride back home. Though we'd done this many times before and never had any issues, only a couple of minutes into our walk back home, a driver pulled up next to us, willing to give us a ride. It was some guy in a white pickup truck who we had never seen before. He told us to get in the back, and we did. My mom started giving him directions to our home from the highway, but it honestly looked like the guy was just ignoring her. When we came to our exit, this was confirmed as he straight up drove right past it. The guy then went on to explain how he had to make a quick detour first. This was extremely unnerving, but after a while, we came up to a farm. The driver took out the keys, told us to wait in the car, and disappeared. My mom clearly didn't know what to do. I mean, we couldn't just leave. We were in an unfamiliar area in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later, the driver came back, but now with a second guy. The guy looked at us and started flipping out, screaming at the driver. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly what was said, but this is what I can remember. The guy screamed at the driver that he shouldn't have brought someone with a child and that there's no way anything can happen now. From what I recall, more things along those lines were said, but I can't remember exactly. The driver then got back in the truck and apologized to us. My mom sternly told the man to take us back to where he had picked us up. She technically hadn't given him our address yet and, for obvious reasons, now did not want that information known. The drive back was done in complete silence. Looking back, my mom and I both agree that the purpose of that stop was not as innocent as a simple detour. We honestly see ourselves as lucky for making it out of that situation. We lived in that town for 5 years after that and never once saw those two guys again. It was a rainy night and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There are occasional little parking lots with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her 50s, maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5 feet 11 inches or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man on the other hand would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth, very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey," so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost, helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, then the two doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts, a lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser, with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face, and now whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this, no footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Carter, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space, there was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in a gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Elias to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school, even though I wasn't even invited. Elias was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive. I made the choice to go with Elias. When we arrived at the home late at night, Elias told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I don't know could try and take it from me while I'm not looking. At first, I was confused. I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Elias into the home's backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Elias had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1:30 in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Elias. Despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him or see him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Elias, they all said they had not. I decided to call Henry to find out where he was, so I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Elias's car. It had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking. I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else who could help, so I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why did Elias decide to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Elias's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk when I knew I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired and crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone could see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop. As minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man began trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbling or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner onto my street away from the party, I started feeling uneasy for some reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and I told the man that we had just driven past it. I felt my gut telling me to get out, but I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. But before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. A cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from then on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The car slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right, I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Liège, Germany, to Paris. He was a French man, a somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car, a ride with him to Paris where I needed to pick up. My paintings were from an exhibition I had there. It was October, I was 30 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English, I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. It was a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first was a pretty girl who was his girlfriend and had died falling off the back of his motorcycle, he said. The second was a girlfriend who had died in a car crash. He told me the third girlfriend died from a brain tumor and the fourth fell off a horse. He said, "I'm such an unlucky man." I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question to me. Excellent, I thought, get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms, but no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. Oh, I thought. Not good, but I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery, perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, "I don't want to speak English anymore." This was definitely not a request. Then silence, uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight or flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended, just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we would get deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m., and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed so tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly. They were rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. It did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male pheromone perceptible only to men. Facing off, I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries of mercy from me, not to this. I also had my own secret store of crazy. I was big and strong at that time, rode tough through my travels, and there's no substitute for my nothing to lose stare. That is all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then. I think rather quickly, in a matter of seconds, it's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when the victim is small and scared, begging and weak. I think between those two uneven people, it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. 5:12 p.m. The car was now moving really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation, transformed into a potential killer myself, maybe. My chauffeur could read my mind, or my body language, or sense my intent, or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth, and then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God. Out of those woods. Odd how these memories have come back to me as I write this. Some memories I'm not certain of. Like, did he say he had to hit one girlfriend with a shovel because she attacked him and would not be quiet and leave him in peace? Did he really explain the 2 backpacks on the back seat? Did I not hear that on purpose? Did I later imagine those words? Did I see more passports in his glove box than the 4 he pulled out? Why didn't I say, stop the car, after the passport show? The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway. Now I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said no. My first word spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that had I broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent sometimes. One needs to be to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness as evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, and with night settling in, I watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French, and I thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell had just happened. It was fully dark now. I was exhausted after that little adventure and soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried about what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands, wondering if I was still alive. Jump ahead 20 years, and I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe on a boulevard in Liege, Germany. For whatever reason, we discussed the topic of hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him, all those years ago, me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, in 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on the French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking. I've often wondered if the murdered women and other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul. Since then, I've felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. After returning from a night to celebrate the arrival of the new year, my husband and I returned to our apartment complex to turn in for the night. We both had a couple of drinks, but neither of us were intoxicated. As much as we enjoy partying with friends, when it comes down to it, we are really just homebodies. We lived in the corner penthouse suite of our complex. Although this was never confirmed, it was suspected the owners wanted to convert this apartment complex into condos. The rent certainly was not cheap, and access was limited to this floor. Upon entering the building, there is a walk-up to secure doors, and every now and then there would be a doorman to greet you as you entered or exited. There were also multiple security cameras placed throughout and around the building. It was an especially cold evening, and when we returned, there was no doorman present. It was late, at least 2:30 a.m. The foyer was empty, and one of the lights flickered softly. My husband and I entered the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. The elevator ride was smooth, and as we ascended, I could feel myself becoming more relaxed, excited to finally be home and able to rest. My feet were killing me from wearing heels all night in the bitter cold. The bell chimed, signaling we had reached our floor. The door slid open, and we turned the corner to the left. Like I said, our suite was the corner suite at the end of the hall. However, something caught our eye. A woman, or what at least looked like a woman, was meandering through the hallway. Her hair was dark and scattered, it looked to be matted and covered her face. She wore a black lace dress that was torn and looked to be in bad shape. Thinking back, I don't even think she had any footwear on. We assumed she was intoxicated and was having difficulty finding her suite. Although on closer inspection, she didn't look familiar. We knew all of our neighbors, as, like I said, access was limited on this floor. I looked at my husband, who stood still as well. I could see he was contemplating the same thoughts. I asked him, should we ask if she needs help? He looked at me and said, just wait, maybe she's just drunk and having a hard time finding her suite. The woman just continued to slowly slide herself along the walls of the hallway, stopping at each door and peering through the exterior peepholes. Admittedly, this was creepy, but it just added to the theory that she was a drunk woman looking for her friends. She was humming, or what I believe was humming. The sound was something between a growl and a hum. We stood there in utter disbelief and awe. However, there was a veil of tension and uneasiness that lingered. The strange woman stumbled through the hallway, hunched over, until she pulled herself up to peer through the peephole. She eventually got to a suite of an elderly lady, whom I have a strong connection with. We'll just call her Evelyn. Evelyn was the sort of woman whose family had neglected her and rarely visited. She would bring my husband and me baked goods from time to time. I would bring her leftovers and assist her with groceries and medication. Frequently, Evelyn's smoke alarm would constantly go off. I would have to rush over and pull out the smoldering toast from her toaster and fan her smoke alarm until it stopped beeping. At times, a nuisance, but it would always turn into tea time. Nevertheless, I cared about Evelyn. So when I saw this strange woman peer into her peephole, I reacted. I blurted out, "Excuse me, are you all right?" I could feel myself lose confidence as I asked. The strange woman seemed to shudder for a moment and hunched over to the floor. She looked like she was about to puke or was frightened by my voice. My husband and I stepped closer, but the woman then let out a series of soft and menacing laughs, just barely audible. I have to admit, in this moment I was thoroughly creeped out and reached for my cell phone. It was uncomfortable because we couldn't get to our suite. Without having to walk right past this deranged woman, my husband said, "Hey, did you hear us? Do you need help?" Her laugh began to grow into what was a steady cackle. The strange woman then stood up. As she stood up, her cackle became a mixture between a cackle and a boisterous growl. She then stumbled forward and continued walking down the hall. There was a staircase just outside of our suite. I assumed she was making her way to the stairs, just too embarrassed to walk past us to the elevator. Maybe she was just a drunk woman, and this was nothing more than an uncomfortable standoff with a sad and intoxicated woman. I mean, if she was really that drunk, the stairs probably weren't a good idea. We were on the 7th floor. Nevertheless, I just didn't feel like it was worth the risk to engage with this woman. I just wanted to enter my suite and dive into bed. It was late, and my feet still hurt. As we took a few steps forward, the woman stopped, almost with laser precision. She stood up completely straight, looked right at our door, and then began to pound on our door, screaming bloody murder. I could feel myself becoming swallowed with fear. I reached for my cell phone and began to dial 911. The woman kept pounding on our door and screaming. To be honest, I'm surprised none of our neighbors came out to see what was happening. Part of me thinks they were too afraid themselves and were probably peering out of their peepholes. Afraid of what our neighbors would think, my husband said, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." And just like that, the strange woman stopped, fell to the ground, and began crawling quickly towards us. She looked up for a brief second. All I could see were her dark eyes. Her mouth seemed to be stained black, and she was growling again, but this time it was as if there was something in her throat that she was choking on. Frozen with fear, my husband and I just watched until she flashed us a menacing hiss, the kind you would hear in a movie but never imagined in real life. Terrified, I whipped off my shoes, and my husband and I ran towards the staircase on the other side of the building. We didn't want to risk waiting for the elevator and have her catching up. We went down 2 flights of stairs and stopped to listen if she was making her way down the stairs, but it was almost impossible to hear as my heart was pounding so hard. I thought to myself, what the hell was going on? We waited there for 10 minutes or so until eventually, we had the courage to head up the stairs and back to our suite. The woman was gone, and so we entered our suite. I was just relieved to finally be safe in my home. My husband sent a text to our landlord, and he replied that we would hear from him in the morning. I was so unbelievably exhausted but found it incredibly difficult to sleep. The sound of that woman's growling and cackling rang in my ears. I hardly slept. The next day, when my husband went to speak to the landlord, he asked him to check the security cameras. Although nothing turned up, the landlord said the cameras glitched due to the frigid temperatures last night. To this day, I still don't know what to think. That woman most certainly had problems. The question is, was she dangerous? We moved about a year later, but every New Year's Eve, I still think about that night. It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. When I was 12, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there, they divorced. My mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was habitually leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town. I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and have a small chat with. I had never been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on the USA channel, and I had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 12, I wasn't concerned with the electricity bills or even saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party or people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off of the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen and leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off of the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started, as slowly and as quietly as I could, to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide and seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything, it was just like they were moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the doorway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, however, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and I ran down the hallway. I believe the only reason I wasn't grabbed by now is because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children would do when they're afraid. I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and I ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time as it was right off the side of the couch. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked and the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it certainly wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. That after he had stopped, though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure. I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. It was also several feet off the ground as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what had happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. Scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out this kind of window was a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated person. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house. That's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked back up the steps and started peering inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, meaning no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe at how stupid this could have turned out, and I wish I would have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterward. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and I noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, and checked all the windows and front door. Then I called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on. Very few people experience something so traumatizing at a young age that it sticks with them forever. I'm one of those people. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I grew up in a broken household. Our mom raised us, our dad was a deadbeat and disappeared out of our lives. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts and would usually have our grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Chump is 2 years older than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms given the circumstances. We lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing, though. It was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. My grandma was watching TV, and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Rock, quiet down." Chump was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30, given that it was probably approaching that time. I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise, my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple: living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected, and then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall, mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying good night to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now, I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Chump. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms. She was whispering stuff to herself, and then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name, "Bonnie, Bonnie, open the door." I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. I distinctly remember my grandma screaming, "Get the out of here." The woman screamed, "Where is Bonnie?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming, "Bonnie," and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Chump, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors, mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. My family and I used to go camping all the time, sometimes more than 3 or 4 times a year, even. We were camping in White Mountain National Forest, and it was our first time doing a more primitive type of camp. Usually, we went to traditional campsites like Yogi Bear Jellystone or even KOA, but this time we were in for something different. I wasn't that excited for it because I didn't think it would be as fun. I think I was 14 when this happened, around that age at least. I was still in an angsty teenage phase, if you will. I was still a good kid, just a little emotional and rough around the edges. When we got there, while my parents were setting up, my little brother and I wanted to do some exploring. We walked around for a while, but we didn't go too far as we didn't know the area and we didn't want to get lost or stray too far from camp. We talked about anything you would imagine 2 unsupervised children would talk about. I started messing with my little brother, Blair, saying things like we were lost and to watch out for the bears and the monsters. Pretty crappy, I know, but I thought it was funny. We messed with each other like that all the time, but I could tell he was actually starting to get scared, so I let him know I was only joking. I was hoping to find a cool bank offshore, like a place we could swim or fish. I found the perfect spot. He ran over to it to investigate it, and I fell in love with the scenery. It truly was beautiful. Our little kid brains loved every second of the outdoors. I knew we had been gone a while, though, and I was in charge of my brother, and I didn't want us to get in trouble. Mom wanted us back before dark anyway, and we were starting to lose daylight. So, we walked back to camp, had dinner, and did our nightly ritual with the family, like playing board games. We had a campfire and all that fun stuff until eventually, it was time for bed. Blair and I were staying in our own tent, while our mom and dad had their own as well. We got our sleeping bags, a lantern, and not much of anything else, maybe some snacks that we snuck into our tent and a DVD player to watch a movie. I fell asleep, but I remember waking up for seemingly no reason in a groggy state of mind. I turned over towards Blair and noticed he was gone. I instantly shot up. I walked out of the tent and saw him walking towards the trail that we came from earlier. "Blair, what are you doing?" I asked. "Get back to sleep before Dad finds out what you're doing." That was when I heard a noise coming from my parents' tent. I worried that I woke them up by basically yelling. I don't know how Blair got out of the tent without me noticing in the first place, but he kept walking until eventually, he was out of my sight. I ended up finding him off the trail a ways, thanks to my lantern, and he was sitting by the lake. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him towards camp when all of a sudden, we saw a shadow. It was a man, and there was something really wrong with him. Like, seriously. He wasn't only just being a creep by staring at us, but he was clearly deranged. He was standing in the moonlight, and I could see him semi-clearly. He had long, dark hair that looked greasy and a creepy mustache. He also had some sort of tool in his hand that looked like a hammer. The way he was just standing there, all crusty looking and staring intensely, showed me enough. He was just sitting there, mouth breathing, and he was extremely pale. He looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I didn't stay for another second or even bother to say a word to him. I mean, come on, I was pretty sure he was a murderer. Now the chase was on. Blair wasn't as fast as me and he could barely keep up. Keep in mind, he was only 9 or 10, so his little legs could only go so fast. I grabbed his arm and practically dragged him to make him go faster. The other problem that we had was we had to get past this man to get back to camp, so we legit had to make a detour and run in a circle around him. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't dark or if we weren't already close to home. We were pretty sure that we lost him and eventually met up with Mom and Dad. They found us out a ways from camp. I guess we were heading in the wrong direction. We kind of got lost in the panic, I guess. You'll never guess what happened after that. When we arrived back at camp, my dad's truck was gone, the only vehicle that we had out there. That man baited us off camp and he stole the truck, broke into our tents, and stole my dad's wallet and phone. Luckily, we had a walkie-talkie to call for help. The police found my dad's truck and actually arrested the man a few days later. What if we would have been out further into the woods that night? That man would have been out further into the woods that night. That man would have caught us, no doubt about it. He chased us through the woods and tried to murder us or kidnap us, one of the two. When my dad got the truck back, unfortunately, it was totaled in a drunk driving incident by the man that stole it. Man, that trip was a nightmare. It all started on a rainy night. My dad had wanted me to babysit my little brothers while he went to the bar to play pool and drink. I'd gotten them to settle down for the night and I decided to go order some food and chill, playing some CS while I waited. About 30 minutes had gone by and I was wondering why the hell my food was taking so long. I finally heard a knock on my door and there was a rough-looking man who said he had my food. I tipped him and he went on his way. I closed the door and walked back to my computer, completely forgetting to lock it. If one of my protective friends hadn't said something while we were gaming, things might have gone a lot worse. Them asking to make sure I locked the door was a potential life-saving question, because in fact, I had completely forgotten to lock the door. To me, it wasn't the biggest deal at the time, but I'm glad they said something and you'll see why here in a minute. I checked on the door to make sure it was locked, and of course, it wasn't. So I locked the door real quick and went back to gaming. My computer, by the way, was in my living room, and to the right of me was my kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a giant bay window facing directly into where I was sitting and gaming. I started eating my food while gaming, and I heard my front door knob jiggle. I thought maybe I was just scared and hallucinating it since I was home alone and my brothers were asleep in bed, until my dog started barking at the front door. That was the exact moment I realized that something bad was happening. Whoever was there started banging and rattling the door handle. Freaked out, I ducked under the counter beside me, called my dad, and then called 911. While I was on the phone, my little brothers ran out of their room screaming that someone was standing outside their bedroom window, pointing towards the lock, and smiling and waving at them, trying to get them to open it for him. I completely lost it and started crying, but I had to hide my brothers in my room, in my closet, and I told them to not come out at all. I thought he was going to try the back door next, which was a glass door that he could have easily rocked back and forth to get the lock loose or even just shattered the door completely. All it would really take to break it was an object to swing at it, like a metal bat or something. So I was freaking out. I grabbed a knife and waited for my dad and the police to show up for what felt like forever. I was scared that I was going to have to defend my little brothers and myself in a life or death scenario. I was only 13 at the time, so I was really scared. The cops finally showed up and the person had disappeared. But every night after that, I was scared he would come back and we would finally meet. I have no idea if it was someone random or the Chinese food delivery driver from earlier. I just hoped he would never come back. Luckily, he never did, but that didn't stop me from being scared shitless every night, especially when I was home alone. It's especially creepy when you think about how us kids were alone. I think he knew that and he was trying to prey on us, but luckily he gave up. Hopefully, he heard me calling the police or something, and that's why he ran. I guess we'll never really know for sure. This happened about 2 years ago. I was out for a long walk in the woods, an activity I frequently do, especially in the summertime. On this day, I'd set out early. The route I typically take is in a large woodland with many different paths that take you deeper and deeper in. This time specifically, I decided to make a bit of a change to my usual routine. I decided to walk down a bank in order to walk alongside a river. You could catch glimpses of it if you were higher up on the path, but for the most part, you could really only hear it. It was also much more remote when compared to the other paths. I had been out for 3 hours at this point. I had a book, food and drink, and a first aid kit in my bag. I'd walked far and kept walking, exploring the area. However, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, but it was intense. I'm usually one for the quiet outdoors in nature, but this feeling I had kept making me look behind me to the point where I was no longer relaxed. As I got deeper into the woods, the loneliness became unnerving. I figured I was just scaring myself and tried not to play into it. That's when a cloaked figure with gloves on ran out in front of me. I instantly jumped and felt extremely alarmed. The figure had a mask on, a crow's mask, like, think a plague doctor mask. I wanted to run, and everything inside me was telling me to run, but for whatever reason, I really wanted to seem like I wasn't bothered and that the figure had failed to cause much of a reaction. So I awkwardly said, "Okay, good one. I'll be on my way now." The figure didn't say anything, rather, it began tilting its head as I walked around it and continued down the path. It was just standing there, watching me. I was extremely creeped out. Once I walked past it, I just kept walking, feeling shaken but trying not to let it show. I was nervous to look back, but eventually, I did. The creepy figure was still in the same place, still watching me walk away. He, or possibly she, gave me a wave, but not a friendly one, just a sinister one. I don't really know how to explain it, but it was slow and felt threatening. I was stupid. At this point, I felt far enough away from the figure, so I flipped at the bird, a choice I instantly regretted. The figure went from standing and waving to a full-on unhinged run in my direction. I, at this point, didn't stick around and legged it out of there. The figure was making intense, loud, and almost demonic noises as it chased me. I honestly thought I was going to die, but it all came to an end when I managed to outrun this freak and made it up onto an open footpath where I was reunited with joggers and dog walkers. I was stuck in this nervous state but still so beyond happy to see other people. I tried to make as many of them aware as I could, and the whole situation was ultimately reported. I got home safely by catching a bus into town. They were rare on that side of the county, but I managed, thankfully. I felt lucky yet really detached and uncomfortable. The area was investigated by police, but it was so deep in the woods, I don't know how much they covered. As of yet, nothing has been reported since, and nobody nor anything has been found. I now avoid that area and don't plan on going too far off the beaten track on my own again. I still think about this experience. It's still vivid in my mind and absolutely terrifying to me. Nowadays, I don't camp nearly as much as I used to. I'm 24, and ever since I was young, I've been into hiking. Now, I get hiking isn't all that appealing to most people, but because of where I live, it's pretty easy to get into. You don't have to travel all that far for a pretty stunning scenic view. I try to find a new trail to hike every weekend. Typically, I'll hike alone, so I always keep a knife in my backpack for protection against wildlife. Should it ever come to that, though, in all my years of hiking, I've never once had to actually use it. In fact, I've never run into any dangerous situation while hiking. Well, at least up until a few days ago. I was driving to a heavily forested hiking trail I'd never been to before. Now, I hike in the afternoon, and this happened around the time of year where the days were starting to get shorter. In other words, the sun was setting earlier and earlier each day. This was a key detail that I had completely forgotten about prior to leaving. Only after I started driving to the place did I realize it would be completely dark outside before I would even be able to finish my hike. A decision I still regret making is deciding to do the hike anyway. I got a bad feeling about it right when I started. Fast forward a few hours, and I was now about 85% finished with the route I picked out. By this point, it was almost completely dark. I had a flashlight, but still, the whole scene was pretty eerie. This portion of the trail was deep in the forest. It was so dense with trees that the moonlight could barely even find its way through. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful scenery in the day, but alone at night, it was nothing short of disturbing. It was then that I was really starting to regret my decision to carry out the hike. That's when I saw light up ahead on the trail. As soon as I shined my flashlight in its direction, it immediately got turned off. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't exactly turn back, so I was pretty much forced to go directly towards where it had been. In the back of my mind, I knew the chances of it being another hiker in the dark were slim to none. Eventually, I reached where the light came from. There was no one. Instead, there was a large duffel bag lying on the ground. I began scanning the trees with my flashlight. That's when a large, probably 6.5-foot man stepped out from behind one of the trees. My body completely froze up. There I stood, like a deer in headlights, shining my light on the guy. He then slowly revealed a machete from behind his back. Seeing this, I started running for my life down the trail and in the direction of my car. I looked behind me, and the guy was chasing me. I dropped my backpack so I could run faster. When I finally reached a clearing in the forest and could see my car, I was still sprinting. I grabbed my keys from my pocket and unlocked it. I got inside, locked the doors, and had the engine on in less than 5 seconds. However, the guy was still behind me and was able to completely slash one of my back tires before I could drive off. I drove on an almost completely flat tire for the next 5 miles back to my house. Right as I pulled into my driveway, I called the police and reported the man. Although I have no idea if he was found, quite frankly, I have no idea if the police even searched for him. A part of me wants to go back to retrieve my backpack, which contains hundreds of dollars in equipment, but there's no way I can bring myself to do it. Plus, There's no guarantee it's still even there. For all I know, the guy went back and took it. I still don't know what I stumbled upon that night. This was by far the scariest experience I've ever had and the closest I've ever felt to death. I've owned and lived in the same house for 8 years. It's a normal family-sized home, which was relevant when I had roommates. But when they moved out and it just became me living here, I had nothing to do with the extra space. It was technically a 4-bedroom house, but I only used 2 of the bedrooms. One is my main bedroom and one is the game room. The other 2 rooms were on the far end of the upstairs hallway. One had a few storage boxes in it, and the other was completely empty. After getting out of work at 9 o'clock, I picked up Wendy's on the way home and pretty much went right to the game room. I was off tomorrow, so what better to do than game all night? I put my headphones on and loaded up COD, but before I had time to even load into a match, I thought I heard something that sounded like a knock at the front door. I took my headset off and listened, but not hearing anything and figuring they would have knocked again if there was someone there, I went back to my game. Probably a whole 2 hours went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like either a knock or a door closing or something like that, but with my headphones on and with my room door closed, it was way too quiet for me to tell. I got up and opened the door, looking out into the hallway and waiting for that sound to come again. After a minute, though, I went downstairs and looked out the front door. Nobody was outside my house, and everything seemed normal. Having been hearing these sounds, though, I obviously made sure the door was locked before going back upstairs. To be a bit more cautious, I left my room door open this time, so if it happened again, maybe I'd hear it better. I put my headset back on and continued gaming. I played through a whole round, so like 20-ish minutes. As the game ended and I leaned back in my chair, a figure rushed past the open doorway, just off to the side of my view. I immediately threw my headphones off and jumped from my chair, horrified and unsure what to do. I just stared at the doorway. I didn't get the courage to finally move for several minutes. When I looked into the hallway, though, and eventually the rest of the house, nobody was there, but the front door was unlocked again. When police came and investigated, it was clear that the person had been hiding and very likely living in the empty room. I hadn't been in there for weeks or maybe even months, so all this time they could have been just on the other side of the wall from me, and I had no idea. It's really scary to think about, especially if I'd happened to confront him. There's no saying what he would have done. This happened when my now husband and I were moving from the east to the west coast of the US. This had been our second time making this trip, and this one was just to pick up a few last things and grab our 2 dogs. At this point, we were just trying to make good time since we were tired of being on the road and would only stop for food and restroom breaks. So we weren't strangers to rest stops at odd hours of the day. I can't remember what state this happened in because we do a lot of traveling, and rest stops have all blurred together over the years. Anyways, my husband had been driving for a while, and it was time to switch off, walk the dogs, and stretch our legs. So we pulled into a rest stop around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, most likely with someone sleeping inside of it, and not that many truckers in the truck area, so the rest area was fairly empty. I jumped out of the car and let my husband know I was going to run into the restroom before I let the dogs out. While I ran in, he was going to hang out by the car to have a smoke and keep an eye on our dogs. However, we parked our car by the dog area, and to get to the restrooms, you had to walk over this hill. You couldn't see the restrooms from our car. Being late at night, my husband decided to walk most of the way with me to make sure I got there okay. I wasn't worried but didn't mind the extra comfort of having him there. I finished up in the restroom and came out to walk the dogs and let my husband take his restroom break. Even though it was late and I felt a bit cut off from the lighted area of the rest stop, I wasn't worried. I'm small and don't weigh much, but my dogs are German Shepherd mixes and very protective of me. Plus, I was taught self-defense at a young age and feel capable of defending myself if the time came. So I'm walking my dogs and letting them do their business when I noticed that one of the semi-trucks, which had been sitting on the far side of the stop, starts up and slowly drives in my direction. This didn't seem worrisome to me because they were on the trucker's side, and I assumed they were heading to the exit to get back onto the highway. I grabbed 2 doggy bags to clean up after my dogs and started heading to the trash can. As I'm walking, I'm suddenly blinded by bright headlights. I looked in the direction of the lights and saw that the semi, which I thought was leaving, had pulled up as close to the truck lot and car lot divide as possible and now had its brights aimed directly at me. Pissed off that someone was blinding me with their brights, I quickly tossed the poop bags away and started walking back to my car. As I'm walking away, the dude starts flashing his lights over and over again. I'm almost to my car, wondering if I'm missing something and becoming more and more irritated. He starts creeping his truck in my direction again while flashing his lights. My dog sensed my irritation and immediately went on alert, staring in the trucker's direction. I finally made my way to my car, and the guy is still flashing his lights while stopping his truck in my direction again. I don't scare easily, so I decided to stand there and glare in his direction. Then he finally stopped flashing his lights. Good, I assumed he was done and started getting my keys out to unlock the car. Suddenly, my dogs stiffened beside me, their hackles raised, and they began to growl. I heard the sound of a door opening and turned back in the trucker's direction. I saw his door was now opened, and I saw a foot starting to exit the truck. I'm sitting there thinking this guy is a complete idiot when, at this point, my husband shows up and wraps his arm around me while flipping the trucker off. The trucker's foot disappears back into his truck. He shuts his door and leaves the rest stop pretty fast. I told my husband about him flashing his lights, and he explained that truckers use this method to flag women down at rest stops for sex. I was grossed out. I'm guessing he thought I was alone because of how the rest stop was set up. However, I was in no way dressed like someone interested in random sex at a rest stop. I was wearing layers because it was cold and driving a newer car. Plus, what idiot thinks it's a good idea to try to approach someone with 2 huge dogs? Although I was never scared during the whole thing, I do think the situation was creepy because the guy was obviously not quite there and was acting pretty abrasive. All started with a camping trip. Me and my girlfriend, let's just call her Lee, were young and dumb, blissfully unaware of the cosmic curveball life was about to throw our way. Picture this: crisp mountain air, crackling campfire, the Milky Way sprawled across the velvet darkness. Textbook postcard perfect. Except the postcard ripped in half when we woke up the next morning, disoriented, clothes rumpled, and with a gaping hole in our memories where the previous day should have been. We brushed it off as a weird shared dream, a glitch in the matrix, but a niggling unease settled in our gut, a premonition of things to come. Back in the familiar chaos of college life, things got weirder. Lee, normally the picture of health, started experiencing these unexplainable physical oddities, dizzy spells, nausea, heightened sensitivity to light. Then came the bombshell: pregnant. Impossible. She was on the pill religiously. The doctors were as confused as us, their tests revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, as the weeks ticked by, the strangeness intensified. Lee's body became a battleground, her health fluctuating like a runaway roller coaster. One week she'd be glowing, energetic, the next, pale and listless. The baby inside her, meanwhile, seemed to be defying the laws of biology, growing at an alarming rate. The ultrasound session was disturbing. Before Lee and I knew what we were looking at, the technician ended the session. She seemed disturbed, leaving with no explanations given. Both Lee and I were beyond bewildered, bordering on desperation. My countless calls to the specialist's office only yielded the frustrating response, "The doctor is busy. He will call you back." But that call never came. Determined to uncover the truth hidden in those ultrasound images, I took matters into my own hands, parking myself near his car after his workday. The specialist was visibly shocked to find me there. There was no subtlety in my approach. I practically tried to force an answer from him. His bewildered expression shifted as he hesitated before urging, "Tell your wife to get an abortion." That's all I got from him, nothing more. His profound fear caught my attention. I couldn't fathom why he seemed so terrified about our baby's unusual condition. Then, the arrival of a black van nearby intensified his distress. His eyes fixated on it, and the fear seemed to double. As I left, deliberately passing close to the van, the driver's window lowered. Two men in suits and sunglasses shot me an eerie look. As the doctor drove away, the van started up, following him ominously into the unknown. The fear gnawed at me, a constant unwelcome companion. It was this creeping sense of being watched, a feeling like unseen eyes were tracking our every move. Then came that night in the apartment. We woke up, not to the comforting hum of the fridge or the distant sirens of the city, but to a bone-chilling silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of our hearts. In the inky blackness, a presence loomed, unseen but undeniable, radiating an oppressive dread that seeped into our very bones. I am telling you, that night there was more than us in that apartment. Only the Lord knows what that presence was, but it felt otherworldly. We fled that night, seeking refuge in Lee's parents' house, the unease clinging to us like a second skin. That's when I started getting anxiously suspicious about the gap in our memories from the night out camping in the wild. The pieces started falling into place, the strangeness of that event, the unexplainable pregnancy, the constant feeling of being watched. They all pointed toward something not of this world. The doctor's frantic insistence on more tests, his desperate pleas for termination. What further fueled my suspicion was that the doctor always had excuses not to see us or kept the sessions ridiculously short, never giving any clear answers to any of our questions. To myself, I wondered if it was his way to punish me for the time I creeped up to him in the parking lot, or if he was hiding something from us, possibly both. This wasn't a normal pregnancy. This was something else entirely. God knows what. Lee, bless her heart, refused to listen. Motherhood blazed in her eyes, a fierce determination that trumped logic and fear. She was going to have this baby, no matter what the test said, no matter what dark secret it held. Eventually, I decided it's better to let her live her naive dream. Denial can be bliss. I was hoping that she was right. I was hoping it was merely me being paranoid. If the baby was abnormal, we would have it anyway, if that is what she wanted. The climax arrived like a sucker punch. Lee went into early labor, the doctors acting frantic, their faces etched with worry. Then came those two men in suits, their expressions unreadable, barring my entry to the delivery room like guardians of some forbidden secret. It was like they were hiding something, something terrifying. When they finally let me in, it was over. The baby, they claimed, died during the procedure. We never saw the body. Some fabricated story about a mix-up, an admin error. A wave of relief washed over me, an undeniable sensation despite the crushing grief clawing at my insides, a hollow echoing in my chest. Lee was devastated. It was slow, but time heals all, and she recovered. The years that followed were a haze: marriage, 3 beautiful, normal children, a life built on laughter and love. We tried to build normally and succeeded to a large extent. And that is our story. Yet it does not end there. Sometimes I wish it did. Ignorance would have been a simpler path. Something was off. Both of us shared nightmares, became our unwelcome souvenir. We never spoke of them, but the knowing glances confirmed our mutual torment. Weeks of normalcy could be shattered by a single morning, both of us awakening as if we'd relived that night in the wilderness every time, both of us at the same time. Its synchronized nature was disturbing. These random nightmares could come at any time. It couldn't continue. When our youngest, barely 5, noticed our erratic behavior, his innocent question cut deep: why are mommy and daddy in such a bad mood some mornings? Desperate for answers, we confided in a trusted psychologist. He suspected suppressed joint trauma and referred us to a hypnotherapist and her practice partner. Our separate but simultaneous sessions with the 2 hypnotherapists uncovered the horror. It all came out, or most of it in any case, or so we believe. Gosh, I think we would have preferred the amnesia. The memories were horrific. The oppressive silence of the woods, the sudden blinding light that filled our tent, the feeling of weightlessness as we were lifted skyward, the colossal metallic craft hovering silently above. Then came the figures themselves, tall and slender with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer in the otherworldly light, their faces shrouded in shadow, radiating an unsettling calm. Their movements devoid of human emotion, their large almond-shaped black eyes, that is one thing that I can't get out of my mind since the regression sessions. And of course, those creepy 6-fingered hands touching everywhere. The details were terrifyingly clear: the sterile examination rooms, the cold metal instruments, the unsettling hums and piercing screams. We were not the only ones. They forced us apart. They controlled our bodies and movement. We were taken to separate rooms where we endured unspeakable experiments. From me, they extracted samples, a primal instinct telling me it wasn't what later transpired with Lee. For her, they did something far more monstrous, invasive, and unbelievable, manipulating her body and planting the unwelcome seed of that child. We didn't know their motives, but had to endure their cold touch and emotionless indifference. Emerging from the therapist's office, we clung to each other, trembling, tears mingling with the bitter stain of confirmation. Those fragmented memories finally coalesced into a horrifying whole, confirming our darkest suspicions. We weren't just abducted, we were subjects in some experiment, unwilling pawns in their grand design. Regular therapy sessions became our battleground, where we wrestled with the horrific memories and lingering trauma. Despite the semblance of normalcy we rebuilt, the shadows of our experience clung to the corners, whispers of what if clinging to the air. But the heaviest shadow loomed large: the baby, the one we lost. The burden became unbearable, a weight threatening to crush us both. I embarked on a mission for answers, tracking down the retired doctor across state lines in a Sarasota restaurant. Years etched on his face mirrored our own. He unveiled the truth: the 6-digit codes on tiny limbs, the oversized head, the huge black eyes like bottomless voids. Each unsettling detail chipped away at our hope, while the revelation of its survival, spirited away by shadowy figures claiming government affiliation, plunged us into a new abyss of fear and confusion. There's more to the story, secrets too unsettling to share in the open, but one even if the answers lead us deeper into the darkness. I worked from 9 to 5, then came home, ate, and then worked on the old house to get it ready to sell. One night, after an exceptionally long and rough night of working on the house, I was on my way home when I saw in the sky something that routinely is not there. I stopped to watch the object only to see it not move at all. Now, realize this is around 1 a.m., and it's not a hot air balloon or anything like that, especially since I have never seen one in my area of Ohio. What I was looking at was an oval. It was wider than it was tall. The object, as many people explained, was not giving off light but was illuminated, if that makes any sense. I was so tired I almost wanted to shrug it off, but I just couldn't for some reason. Not only was it way too bizarre, but what I had been wanting for the last 48 years was happening right before me, my first and so far only UFO sighting. To say I felt spooked would be an understatement. I got back into my car and drove the short 1,000 feet or so to get to my driveway and to the safety of my new home. I knew there were details I was not able to see because of the way the craft was illuminated. Then it dawned on me, nobody's gonna believe me. So, at 1:30 a.m. on a school night, I went into the house and scared my daughter and son by waking them up to witness what was in the sky. I hoped to God it would be there still, and sure enough, it was sitting right there where I left it. I am covered in goosebumps just recalling my daughter's reaction. My son was a huge skeptic, but even at the age of 12, when he witnessed it, looking back he knows what it was. I saw fear in his eyes. He stayed out with us for about a minute or two, then went back inside. My daughter and I were almost speechless. It was beautiful in a way, but we both agreed that it gave off a feeling of fear or dread, like we were not supposed to be seeing this. Then it struck me, I should get some binoculars. I happened to know right where they were because I did most of the boxing for our move. I grabbed the binoculars and was stunned at what I saw. The best I could describe it was it looked totally old on the bottom, like it was made from old clad iron ships long ago, pounded out metal, like with rivets and seams. The top looked very modern, I guess you could say. I remember it had something that resembled what I would call headlights on the back window, like some old cars. I also remember the top almost being shaped like a genie's lamp. My daughter looked through the binoculars and had a terribly similar description. Then I saw something that freaked me out even further. It now looked as though the craft was sitting on a long, thin, yellowish pedestal. I could not figure out what I was now seeing. I gave the binoculars to my daughter, by the way, she was 16 at the time, and asked her to explain to me what she saw at this time, what had changed. I could hear the absolute fright and quiver in her voice. I will never forget what she said, "Dad, there's a beam of light coming out from under whatever it is. I'm scared, Dad. I think we should go in." We could not shake that feeling of fright and the feeling that we should have never seen what we did that night. Both of our bedroom windows faced out directly where this craft could be seen. I found out later my daughter stayed up until morning on live video chat with her friends, absolutely terrified. After showering, I laid in bed exhausted but overwhelmed by what we just saw. It was at this point that I noticed the craft was moving, but at such a slow rate it was undetectable until I was able to compare it to something stationary, which was my vertical windowsill. I will never forget that dull, eerie, pale yellow light this craft illuminated. I forgot to mention that if you held out your arm, the craft was just slightly larger than the width of your thumb, if that makes any sense. I was told later that that is quite large. Eventually, the craft traveled out of sight, and I crashed from exhaustion. Our next tale takes us back to the neon-lit golden age of arcades, a time when joystick warriors battled it out for high scores and bragging rights. In the bustling heart of the city, nestled between a dingy pizzeria and a flickering neon sign promising adult entertainment, stood the Pixel Palace, a haven for gamers seeking an escape from reality. Among the flashing lights and the cacophony of blips and bleeps stood a machine unlike any other, its faded paint and flickering screen whispering tales of a bygone era. This was Dark Carnival, a game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, said to be haunted by the spirit of a former player. The legend went that a young man named Ben, a regular at the Pixel Palace, had become obsessed with Dark Carnival, spending every waking moment at the arcade, his fingers flying across the joystick, his eyes glued to the screen. He poured his allowance into the machine, determined to conquer its fiendishly difficult levels. After weeks of relentless gameplay, Ben finally achieved his goal, his initials flashing proudly at the top of the high-score screen. But his triumph was short-lived. As he celebrated his victory, a surge of electricity, a freak accident, seared through the machine, striking Ben down where he stood. Some say Ben's spirit, unable to leave the game he loved, became trapped within the machine, his digital ghost forever bound to the arcade cabinet. And so the legend of Dark Carnival grew, whispered among the regulars, a chilling tale of obsession and the insatiable hunger for the high score. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, a spooky story meant to deter players from hogging the machine for too long. But there were those who claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences firsthand, the screen flickering erratically, the game playing on its own, the faint sound of laughter echoing from the speakers, a chilling melody that sent shivers down their spines. One evening, a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the arcade, gathered around the Dark Carnival machine, their competitive spirits ignited. Among them was Tony, a skeptic by nature who scoffed at the stories surrounding the game. "It's just an old machine," he declared, "nothing more than wires and circuits." His friends, a mix of believers and those who enjoyed a good scare, exchanged nervous glances as Tony deposited a coin into the machine, the screen bursting to life with a burst of static. As Tony navigated the game's opening levels with ease, his skepticism began to waver. The game seemed to anticipate his every move, the enemies reacting with an almost unnatural precision, as if controlled by a sentient force. Our next story takes us from the desolate expanse of the desert to the claustrophobic darkness of a dense forest. Imagine the towering trees, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy that blocks out the moon and stars. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a symphony of rustling leaves and the snapping of twigs. It's a place of eerie beauty, but also one that can hide unspeakable horrors. A young woman driving home from a late-night shift found herself lost on a deserted road cutting through the heart of such a forest. She had taken a wrong turn, lured off the main highway by a faulty GPS signal. Now she was hopelessly lost, her phone showing no bars, and her car sputtering its last breaths as it ran out of gas. The engine died, plunging her into an oppressive silence broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped her heart. The forest, once beautiful, now loomed around her, menacing and alive. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sounded like approaching footsteps. She knew staying in her car was her safest bet, but the silence of the forest was unbearable, a suffocating blanket of darkness pressing in on her. She turned on her hazard lights, their blinking a beacon of hope in the vast darkness, but the battery quickly drained, leaving her once again in darkness. Time crawled by, each minute an eternity. She dozed off, only to be jolted awake by nightmares fueled by her isolation and fear. The forest came alive with every gust of wind, the shadows seeming to dance and writhe, taking on menacing shapes in the darkness. Then she heard it, a low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the woods surrounding her car. Her blood ran cold, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She strained to listen, her senses on high alert, every muscle in her body tense with fear. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of heavy footsteps crunching on leaves. Something was out there, something big and dangerous, circling her car like a predator stalking its prey. She locked the doors, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the lock. She huddled in the back seat, her eyes wide with terror, her breath catching in her throat. The growls continued throughout the night, each one sending shivers down her spine. She was trapped, hunted by an unseen terror in the heart of the forest. As dawn broke, the growls finally ceased, replaced by the chirping of birds, a jarring contrast to the nightmare she had just endured. She cautiously got out of the car, her legs shaking, her body trembling with exhaustion and terror. She didn't waste any time. With a desperate prayer, she started walking, her eyes scanning the dense undergrowth and her ears straining for any sound that might signal the return of her unseen tormentor. After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled out of the woods and onto a dirt road. A pickup truck soon approached, its driver stopping to help. She had escaped the clutches of the forest, but the terror of that night, the memory of the unseen growls, would forever haunt her dreams. I live in a pretty basic suburban town on Long Island, New York. My girlfriend Valerie and I recently started renting a small house, perfect for 2 to 4 people. We have a decent-sized backyard, and our house is on a very quiet street. One side of our house has a water drainage basin, as the county calls it, which is just a bunch of trees surrounding a sump. On the other side is our neighbor Neil, who lives with his wife. They're a bit older, in their 60s, and quiet. Then directly across the street is a little patch of woods that's in front of another water drainage basin. So for people who like privacy out front, our house is perfect. But then there's the backyard. Neil's house is blocked off by some bushes that the landlord planted years ago, so besides the house directly behind us over the fence, there are no other houses that could see into the yard. However, that one house looking into our backyard was all it took to genuinely make Valerie and I uncomfortable. As I'm writing this, it's currently the fall, so we've been doing fall cleanup the past few weeks in the front and backyard. I started noticing that any time we were out there, there were these 2 people standing at the upstairs window of the house behind us. It was a middle-aged man and woman. When I'd look up to that window, they'd keep looking and watching me. It got really uncomfortable to the point we pretended not to notice it, but we could only stomach doing this for so long. The leaves kept falling day by day, and the fall cleaning would need to continue. Valerie wouldn't want to be in the yard anymore because she was getting so creeped out at those 2 people who would watch us out the window without fail. So one foggy day while raking, I looked up at the window and once again, the 2 were standing at the big rectangular window. I decided to wave at them to see if they'd wave back. After a few seconds of smiling and waving, they didn't move. No reaction, but I could feel their stares and I could see their eyeballs looking at me. I turned away from the window and tried to continue raking, but after sneaking a peek back at the window a couple of minutes later and seeing them still there, I felt too awkward and weird being out there. I went inside. Valerie said we should go over and introduce ourselves. At first, I was hesitant about that, but I was persuaded to walk around the block with her to that house and ring the bell. We expected one of those people at the window to answer the door, but instead, the door cracked open just enough to see half of a person's head. It didn't look like either of those people who were always at the window. It was also super dark in the house to the point that it looked incredibly ominous and uncanny staring at half of that person's face. This guy looked a lot younger, like in his 22-year-old. Valerie and I tried to be friendly and introduce ourselves. The guy seemed very closed off though and not interested in speaking. He had a very, "what do you need" type of attitude about him. When I asked if he lives with anyone else here, like his parents, he said no. I mentioned the man and woman who were always at the window upstairs, and the guy on the other side of the door said he doesn't know who I'm talking about. Valerie and I felt really unsettled, so we just left. But weirdly, as we walked down the walkway back to the sidewalk, I noticed the guy behind the door was still peering half of his face through the cracked open door. I'm sure he watched us walk away until we were out of sight. That interaction was weirder and creepier than we were expecting. When we got back home, I went upstairs to our room. The upstairs of our house is only our master bedroom and the bathroom. It has 2 windows. One of the windows looks over to that house over the fence. I looked out the window to see those 2 people looking out the window again, and even at this distance, I felt like they were staring right at me. I shut the blinds and went down to tell Valerie. We agreed it was time to plant some arborvitaes to block their window from view. The only problem is it's already the fall, and it's too late to plant any kind of trees. We have to make it through winter. After a few days of not looking outside the bedroom window or going into the backyard, one night we heard a strange knocking sound from downstairs. I told Valerie to wait in bed while I went downstairs. The knocking got louder, and I quickly discovered it wasn't the sound of knocking on one of the doors, but rather on the glass of one of the backyard windows. The blinds of it were, of course, shut because we didn't want those creepy people looking into our living room at night. I approached it, and yes, it was 100% a fist knocking on the glass. I considered saying, "Who's there?" but I froze, and I was too scared. Instead, I flicked on the backyard light, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't even want to look out the window or door. I kept the light on and then went back upstairs to my room where I told Valerie about the creepy knocking. But I claimed that I chased whoever it was away. I exaggerated in fear of sounding like a coward. I also didn't want her to worry. We both imagined it to have been something to do with that house though. Nothing has happened since, but I'll have to update throughout the winter. Update, it's been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen those people at the window ever since. But last night, we heard yelling and screaming from that house. I had to open our window, and it became clear there were muffled yells coming from that house. The fact that we heard it through 2 sets of closed windows just goes to show how loud the yelling was. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped and went quiet. We almost called the police, but ultimately didn't. I'll update again if anything else happens, but we're really getting creeped out here now. Summer is the greatest season by a long shot. That's a hill I'll die on any day. My love for the summer doesn't revolve around partying or drinking, as you may expect, but nature, warmer weather, and the outdoors are inseparable in my opinion. And I guarantee you that when the heat rolls through, I spend more hours outside than inside. It was a warm night in mid-June a few summers ago when this happened. I was 16 or 17 at the time. For context, there's a massive nature preserve near my house. When I say massive, I mean it. It's close to 1,000 acres in size. To this day, there are still parts of it that I'm positive I haven't explored. 2 of my friends and I agreed to spend a night camping in those woods. Technically, camping there was strictly forbidden and borderline illegal, but we figured that there was no chance someone would catch us in this dense forest. We just had to trek as deeply as possible. Zane was the camping fanatic of the group. I'm telling you, this kid loved cosplaying as a Boy Scout and probably knew close to 100 different knots. Our other friend Clement always supplied the drinks. If we were sober, he was unhappy. That's just how things went when Clement was involved. I remember the feeling of the gentle summer breeze blowing through my hair as the 3 of us packed up Clement's car. The weather was ideal, not too cold, not too hot. A few beers later, the 3 of us found ourselves lugging camping equipment through the woods at like 11:40. I can't lie, I was feeling the alcohol start to hit me as we marched along. Zane always carried this industrial-grade flashlight with him, so the darkness of the forest wasn't much of an issue. As much as I enjoyed the outdoors, though, traversing through thick woods at this hour was a bit creepy, even with Zane's flashlight on hand. After close to half an hour of straight walking, the three of us found ourselves in a small flat clearing that was an ideal spot to set up camp. We pitched our tent as per Zane's instruction and set our chairs up. The fire was the next step. Zane once again took the lead on this, and after a few more minutes, we had a pretty decent fire going. Clement reached into his bag and tossed me another drink. He then grabbed his JBL speaker and started playing some music. The vibe was perfect, and we must have been talking and drinking for a good 2 hours. We were all pretty drunk at that point, and I could tell the other guys were just about ready to pack it up for the night. Clement turned the music down and started collecting discarded beer cans. Just then, a deafening whistle pierced the silence. I nearly jumped out of my seat, going from drunken haze to high alert in a matter of seconds. I don't know how to describe it. The whistle was abnormally loud but still sounded distant. Clement quickly shut the speaker off, and the three of us sat in silence as we exchanged concerned looks. I could feel my heartbeat pounding through my chest. We sat there frozen in place for what seemed like forever, listening intently to our surroundings, but there was nothing. It almost seemed quieter now than it had when we first got there, like eerily quiet. Not even the normal wood sounds you come to anticipate. I used that time to replay my memory of the whistle back in my head. It definitely wasn't an animal's noise. The best way I can describe it is a standard whistle you would hear at a ballpark. Zane finally broke the silence, quietly urging us to pack up and leave. Clement and I disagreed with that plan, though. We might risk encountering whoever made the noise, which I was beyond terrified of. It was past 3 a.m. at this point, and an encounter this late would only mean trouble. Zane hypothesized that whoever made that noise was probably aware of our presence, which was a chilling thought. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, staying put violated every survival instinct I had. Packing up and leaving at this hour didn't seem like a much better option either, though. We finally agreed to wait it out. I went to put the fire out, but Zane cautioned me against it, saying that a fire would repel any dangerous animals. Only then did the true gravity of the situation smack me in the face. We were literally miles away from any civilization. It was 3 a.m., and there was an unknown entity somewhere in the darkness. Another 10 minutes or so passed, and we had resumed talking, but at a much lower volume and with no music. I don't think any of us felt safe going to sleep just yet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something small flew over the darkness of Clement's shoulder and landed directly in the fire. It was a firecracker. I screamed bloody murder as it started sparkling in the fire, and Zane cursed as he sprung up out of his chair and bolted into the darkness. Clement and I scrambled to follow, leaving all of our stuff behind. We caught up with Zane, whose flashlight was beaming wildly through the woods as he frantically sprinted. We ran until we couldn't anymore, and Clement keeled over and threw up. Zane shut the light off, and the three of us stood there panting, trying to figure out if we were being followed. To my surprise, it didn't seem like anyone followed us. I don't think I've ever been so afraid. Why in the world would someone have done that? We needed to figure out what to do. Clement wanted to just find our way out of the woods and never come back, but Zane was reluctant to leave all of his camping gear behind. Plus, he reminded us the fire was still active. I was dumbfounded. How could he be concerned with forest fires after what had just happened? Eventually, I agreed with Zane that we should at least check on the site. After all, no one had actually chased us, so there was a slight possibility that whoever threw that firecracker was just playing a cruel prank. Zane was a navigational expert and was actually able to retrace our footsteps. I could make out the glow of the fire as we quietly approached. Before I could get any closer, though, Clement put a hand in front of me and pointed with a horrified look on his face. I strained my eyes to make out the sight in the distance. What I saw is probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. There were 3 people sitting motionlessly in our chairs like statues. The one whose face I could see looked lifeless, and his mouth was open. I was afraid to move. What were they even doing? I thought, realizing that they weren't even talking. This was not normal. The 3 of us watched for a little while longer before deciding to back off. We turned to leave, but Clement's foot clipped a rock, causing him to curse in frustration. Within seconds, the glow from the fire abruptly went dark, as if it had been covered with a cloak. It was freakishly fast. We didn't stick around another second. We again sprinted away from the site, but this time we could hear footsteps crashing behind us. We didn't stop this time. We bolted out of the woods and ran all the way to Clement's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed out of the woods. None of us spoke on the drive back, each of us lost in our thoughts. The next day, Zane insisted we return to the site in the daylight to collect his belongings. Clement wanted nothing to do with that, but I agreed to accompany Zane. After some searching, we eventually found the site, which looked mostly untouched. That is, until we got a little closer and noticed the putrid smell coming from Zane's tent. He unzipped it, and we found a dead, rotting rat. It was sickening. I took the hint and haven't been back to that preserve since. This ongoing issue started about a month ago, but let me provide some context first. I'm 25 years old and I live with my parents. My family is not well off and never has been, and pretty much all the money I make goes into supporting the household. My relationship with my parents is not the best. We bicker quite often, and whenever I'm not working or hanging with friends, I tend to stick to myself. I don't want to write a hard luck story or anything like that, but I've had a tough time growing up. Fitness has always been my go-to escape. I see it as a healthy way to get my mind off personal burdens while also providing a good excuse to leave the house. There's a park about a 20-minute drive from my house that has a workout facility with bars for pull-ups, dips, and other calisthenic exercises. During the summer months, I like to go there to work out, as nature helps calm my mind. I like to go at nighttime because, since it's a public park, it tends to get busy during the day. So, one night while my parents were arguing, I decided to slip out of the house to go work out. It was an extremely hot summer night, probably 85 degrees. I remember breathing in the humid air as I walked from my doorstep to the beat-up white Corolla sitting in our driveway. I started the rickety engine and rolled down the windows as the warm summer breeze flowed through my hair. I arrived at the park and exited my car. I was the only car in the lot. It was probably 10 or 11 p.m. The park was completely empty at this time. The beautiful scenery mixed with the steamy air to create a soothing atmosphere, which is another reason why I like this park so much. It sits on top of a hill that overlooks the downtown area of my city, which always adds pleasant and sentimental emotions to my evenings. Anyway, I started a set on the pull-up bar. I wasn't really counting the repetitions. When I work out, I just do it till failure, then take a break and do it a couple more times. It was somewhere between my sets when I took a break to loosen up my arms. Before I got back on the bar, though, an indescribable feeling came over me, and a subconscious urge forced me to turn my head around. Standing literally a foot away from my face was a tall, beaten-looking man. I actually screamed and jumped like 5 feet back. He let out a raunchy, boisterous laugh and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare me. His appearance and mannerisms were extremely eccentric right off the bat, like he was damn near face to face with me. He clearly had something wrong with him. I asked him why he was so close to me, and he said he lives here. He explained that he sees me working out here all the time and asked me if I could teach him. Now, I'm a very non-confrontational type of person, and especially during a time like that, I really just wanted to be left alone. I awkwardly but politely told him I was just going to do some pull-ups and leave. I hopped back on the bar and continued my set. His words marinated in my mind. He sees me here all the time. I felt the gaze of his eyes burning the back of my neck, but like I said, I'm very non-confrontational. While he did make me increasingly uneasy, I didn't really know what to say or do about it. But then something really weird happened. Right as I was about to finish my set, I heard him mutter my full name. My blood instantly turned cold as I jumped off the bar and slowly backed away. I said a shaky, "What?" He didn't respond and instead just stared at me with this crazed, wide-eyed smile. I thought I might have been hearing things, that's how bizarre it was. I started to get an awful feeling in my gut, like something bad was about to happen. Without another word, I decided to quickly walk back to my car and leave. I felt that man staring at me while I retreated, and thankfully he didn't follow me. Before I left the park, though, I took one last look and saw him hanging from the bar, attempting to do a pull-up. I watched as he grabbed the bar, tried to pull himself up, and then failed and tried again in the exact position I was previously in. I swiftly left the park without looking back. The entire ride back, I questioned myself. Did he really say my name? Was I hallucinating? I tried to forget about it, and eventually, I did. I woke up early the next day to get to work. I work construction and have to wake up very early before my parents, so I was the first one to notice the unmarked envelope sitting at my front door. It was addressed to me. I picked it up and figured I'd read whatever was inside whenever I had the chance. It was another sweltering hot summer day, and I took my lunch break early to cool down. I sat in my car while eating my pre-made sandwich and decided to open the envelope. I didn't really know what to expect, but never in a million years did I think I'd find 10 printed photos of me. They were all unknowingly taken. One was of me in my car, one was of me at work, one was of me exercising at the park. I instantly remembered that creepy man from the night before and started to feel uncontrollably nauseous. I stared in disbelief as I flipped through the rest of them. One was of my house, and the worst of all was a photo of me sleeping, taken from outside my window. I nearly choked on my food as tears rolled down my cheeks. I felt unsafe. I told my boss a serious issue popped up, and I left work right away. He wasn't happy with me, but I didn't care. I took a picture of the photos and drove directly to the police station. I gave the police the photos and explained my encounter at the park. I described the man to them, and they said they would look into it. I told my parents about it too, and for the first time in a long time, I actually got some sympathy out of them. More things started happening, though. A couple of nights later, at like 3 a.m., I awoke to knocks at the door. I didn't open it, assuming the worst. One day, I found a sticky note pasted to my car window with a heart drawn in Sharpie. I went back to the police to report this, and they said they would open up a stalker investigation. I haven't heard back from them yet. I figured it's hard to build a case without having concrete evidence. This happened about a month ago, and I've been on high alert ever since. My parents are looking for a new home, which is already tough given our financial situation. I'll update if anything further happens, but until then, I'll continue to sleep with one eye open. Thank you. My friends and I were never the smartest group. We did some really stupid stunts like going to abandoned areas, vacant homes, etc. But the worst of all the things we did was when we went to the cemetery one night. Every other thing we did, nothing ever happened, but this time was different. We were sophomores in high school, and it was a Friday night, so of course we were hanging out. Most of the time, we didn't have a plan for anything. We would just kind of come up with things to do as the night went on. By 12, two of our friends had decided to go home because they were tired, which left just me and my friend Dan. Neither of us were that tired, but we also didn't want to sit around at home bored all night. Dan brought up the cemetery by his house and said it'd be spooky and exciting to walk around that night. With nothing better to do, I agreed. I don't remember thinking anything of it. Sure, it would be a little creepy and eerie, but I knew it was just a regular cemetery. We took Dan's car and drove to his house, where we parked and walked down the block to the gate surrounding the graveyard. There was a huge entrance gateway, but the gate that went around the perimeter was more of a short wooden fence. We climbed over with ease, and right away, we got a rush of adrenaline. It was a creepy place, no doubt. There was almost no light, only a few dim standing lamps spread across the graveyard. I'm not sure what our goal was, but I think it was just to walk across the whole place without getting scared and then leave. We passed 10 or 15 gravestones when Dan came to a stop. He was looking ahead and told me to wait. I couldn't see much, but in the distance, I could barely make out a figure standing next to one of the gravestones, walking closer to us. Both me and Dan were unsure what to do and just stood there. We both assumed we had totally been caught by one of the graveyard keepers and were probably gonna get arrested or something. The man stopped several feet away, still too far for us to get a good look at him. "What are you two doing here?" he asked. Dan nervously said that we were just exploring. "Well, I'm gonna have to show you two out," he said. He told us to follow him and began walking back in the direction he came in. I think both of us were regretting not running away when we first saw him. As we walked behind him, he passed under one of those standing lamps and both Dan and I immediately froze. The man was wearing ragged clothes, nothing like a graveyard keeper would be wearing. This guy looked like he was homeless. The man must have heard us stop. He turned around, and you could see in his face that this man was crazy. He took a step toward us. "Come here," he said angrily. Dan turned and ran, and I did the same. The man's footsteps behind me were so close it felt like he was going to tackle me at any second. My adrenaline kept me going, and we managed to jump the fence. We heard the man stop on the other side, then punch the wood fence in frustration. We immediately went home and told no one except for our friends because we knew what we were doing was illegal. Both of us think that that man was some homeless person who was probably trying to rob us or maybe do something much worse. Luckily, we never made the mistake of going back there again. Out of all my strange experiences, this is probably the most compelling I had simply because I was not alone when it happened. I was not with just the average kind of people either. I'll put in as much detail exactly as I remembered them, so this may be long. I can't mention the name of the company I work for to protect my job, but it's one of the largest telcos in the Philippines, which is synonymous with the word world. I currently work as one of the senior IT network and server engineers there. I usually get assigned to work on priority repairs on various cell sites and server data centers, mostly in far-flung provinces. This happened in mid-December of 2018 in Nueva Vizcaya, mountainous province in the northern region of the Philippines. It was a priority service call, Sarah T1, the highest of priorities, wherein even the CEO of the company received status updates since the cell site in question also services various military communications devices. As soon as I got into the office, I was dispatched immediately, carrying with me various equipment to replace the existing ones at the cell site. It was a 6-hour drive from Manila. I was asked to go to a specific meeting point in the town nearest the cell site to rendezvous with my escort, an 8-member team from the Philippines 1st Army Scout Ranger Regiment. The area of the cell site is a place where the local communist movement, the New People's Army, is highly active. Apparently, the NPA carried out an operation early in the morning of that day, which caused some of the damage to the equipment. The team I met up with was led by one of my former high school classmates. Let's call him Lieutenant Knox. He had even specifically asked for me as he knew I worked for the telco. He had his men transfer the equipment to their truck, and we began to travel to the cell site. It was already dark at the time. During the long uphill ride, Lieutenant Knox and I did some catching up when they suddenly received a call. I don't understand military speak, so I could not tell exactly what we talked about, but he updated us accordingly, saying that a village on the way to the cell site requested assistance with a possible NPA member harassing a household. Apparently, the man had climbed up on the roof of someone's house, and he was still in the area. Being the nearest, Lieutenant Knox responded that his team would be handling it, so we drove towards the area, keeping the headlights turned off. The countryside, especially the poorer places, are very dark. Soldiers aren't allowed to smoke at night in places like these since the light from their cigarettes could be clearly seen even from afar, giving away their position. It was that dark here. I was hesitant since I'm not exactly a soldier, but he brushed it off, saying it would be a good chance for me to become a soldier for at least one night. Lieutenant Knox, I can say, is a battle-hardened junior officer. He's been to a number of dangerous situations and has fought in many encounters, both high-profile and low-key. He's the type of guy to jump in quickly then ask questions later. I remember him being like that even in school, a very cocky individual, but not entirely without cause, especially now that he was in the army. He even received a medal recently, although I wasn't sure for what. Either way, he said, we're going in. It's part of the job. Now, you have to understand the Philippine Army usually does the police work in these areas where communists, Muslim insurgents, or bandits are active. And when you send in the scouts, the best our military has to offer, you can get an idea of the kind of situation it places in. Even other countries recognized the abilities of the Philippine Scout Rangers, all the more so in this case since these scouts came from the 1st Regiment. They're the best the scouts have to offer, from what I was made to understand. We got to the place a little over 5 minutes after, with me still having second thoughts. Dude, make up your mind. Either you shadow me or I leave you in the truck. But if you stay here, you're gonna be free dinner for the commies. Can't spare you a babysitter for this one, he explained to me. So he made the choice easier for me. I didn't have plans to be abducted. I was already soiling myself, basically not cut out for this stuff. I just wanted to repair the cell site and go home, but I did have plans to get his wife to get back at him for this. Here, he said, handing me a loaded 9mm and 2 clips. I know you're used to this one, and the safety's on. I sat there thinking I wasn't getting paid enough for this job, and I recalled my company insurance policy. It doesn't even cover sports-related injuries, let alone anything you'd see in a firefight. But I didn't have time to dilly-dally, so I stuck with my friend instead of waiting for someone to drag me into the woods and getting held for ransom, which no one's gonna pay for, let's face it. The plan was for 6 of his men to break off into 3 pairs to surround the house in question. Me, Knox, and his sniper Mason were to head over to the water tower about 60 meters out. I guess he planned to snipe the guy and have his men stand by on the ground in case the sniper missed. As we trekked over to the water tower, he told me, "You're too stiff, man. You're wearing dark clothes. No one's gonna see you. We'll be in and out in 10 minutes. You're a VIP, and that's why I came and had my sergeant stay with the platoon at the cell site, so don't worry so much." I didn't know VIPs had to join in responding to calls like this, but the scouts were undermanned as it was already, and that's why my friend needed to multitask at the moment. When we got to the water tower, Private First Class Mason immediately positioned himself, and Lieutenant Knox sat beside him while I positioned myself behind. At that time, I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, this wasn't so bad. I'm far and safe away from that area. But then I heard Mason say, "Sir, you need to see this." Knox brought out some type of binoculars, I guess they call it an NV scope. I couldn't see his reaction because it was dark, but he was silent for a moment as he put down the binoculars. "What in the world," was all Knox could whisper. He then turned to me and asked me to look at the direction he pointed and to tell him what I saw. I was initially concerned, thinking that there were more NPAs now and that we were outnumbered. A reaction like this from a seasoned scout didn't exactly paint a nice picture in my mind. But what I saw was definitely something that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. I wish I hadn't taken those binoculars at all. I even wish I saw more communists instead of what I did see. The image was green, and I saw someone on the roof of a house. It was a man. He didn't have a shirt on, nor did he have any weapons on him. He had very short hair or a shaved head, and he was barefoot. He had jeans on, but the lower part was wrapped from what I could tell. He had dark skin and seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed his arms, which were very, very long. His hands were almost past his knees, and his fingers were also very long and pointed. The fingers were longer than normal and had tips that looked like long nails or even claws. The first thing on my mind was, this can't be real. "Sir," Mason said, "it's moving." I didn't expect what happened next. The thing, whatever it really was, looked right at our group. Even from that distance, it was unmistakable. He or it had its head turned in our direction, and its eyes were solid white. Eye shine, like a cat's eyes. Right then, I nearly dropped the binoculars. Had it not been strapped to my wrist, it probably would have fallen straight through the grated flooring of the water tower. Knox looked to me as if asking what I saw, and all I could say was, "It looked at us, man. It knows we're up here." Almost at the same time, Mason begged, "Sir, your orders." My friend gave the order to put 2 in its head. I think the first shot hit the mark because we heard a scream echo throughout the valley. It sounded like a mix of a high-pitched male screaming and a cornered animal crying out in pain. I'm not sure how to describe it beyond that, but it was the first time I'd ever heard such a sound. I'm sure all of us heard it because of how loud the sound was. Mason never let out a second shot. I don't know if he did so on purpose or if he was caught off guard, but we then heard automatic rifle shots in the distance. Knox immediately told us to go. Mason went down the ladder first at a ridiculous rate, then me, then Knox. Back on the ground, we ran over to the house. These guys were fast and easily outran me. Knox had to basically drag me along the way so I wouldn't be left behind. Honestly, I was reluctant to run where we were headed. I wasn't as hardcore as these scouts. I could barely even keep myself from soiling myself. There was still someone firing in the direction towards the tree line. When we got to the house, near the front, we found one of the soldiers sitting against the wall. His buddies seemed to be applying first aid. His left forearm had a long and nasty gash that leaked fiercely onto the soil. I wanted to vomit. He reported to Knox that something jumped up from the roof and landed right on top of him. It was just after Mason fired. While he didn't get a good look at the attacker due to the darkness, he specifically refused to call it human. Even his buddy didn't think it was human at all. The other 4 soldiers got back to us, saying that the assailant got away. Knox decided to get to know the people in the house, and we found out that a young couple lived there. In fact, the woman was 7 months pregnant. They had texted their local village official, who in turn requested the military to check since, again, they suspected it was an NPA. The 3 of us, Knox, Mason, and me, never told anyone, even the couple, what we saw that night. We simply stated it was a machete-swinging communist trying to rob the couple. After all, the NPAs were known to resort to banditry. A while after that, we finally made our way to the cell site. I simply couldn't stop shaking. When we got there, I immediately got to doing my necessary repairs. Knox and Mason stuck to their story when the rest of their platoon asked about it regarding the recent encounter. They never mentioned anything about the man's description or the strange animal sound. After working an all-nighter and making sure the cell site was operational, Knox and his men minus the injured one took me back to the town where I had parked my car as soon as daybreak came. As his men loaded the damaged equipment I replaced into my car, Knox talked to me. At first, he was trying to joke around, saying I could probably enlist in the regular army now since I had some first-hand experience. I went along with this for a moment, hoping to forget about the strange incident. But inside, I was utterly horrified. However, before I was able to drive away, Knox said to me, "Dude, Mason, we saw the same thing you did. You know what it was, don't you?" I never responded, but inside, I think I knew what he was talking about. The aswang, a mythical creature from Filipino folklore, the stuff of a Filipino child's nightmares. The description, the sound, it was the only thing that made sense explaining what the thing was during the Spanish era from the 1500s to 1890. These creatures were said to be once human who were supposedly blessed by the moon priestesses of old called Baba even, so that the people could have the power to fight the Spanish colonizer who had done them wrong. It is said that the Spaniards decided to persecute these priestesses for witchcraft, then spread tales that aswangs attacked locals and foreigners alike. The aswang is a creature said to be able to shape-shift into either a human or an animal, but it is never able to correctly imitate one or the other. As a human, it has leathery black skin and disproportionate limbs. As an animal, like a cat or dog, it is always black and 3 times the normal size. It can neither speak nor do animal calls, it can only grouch out or scream. They usually eat the flesh of recently deceased humans and animals, but have a strange preference for the ill or pregnant women. Pregnant women like the one in the village. They can never become human again, and being in a swang is hereditary. No one will turn if attacked by one, although the wounds they inflict are often fatal. This is what Knox and I were both thinking, but I'd always considered it just that, just folklore. Yet there's no denying that what we saw that night wasn't human. I have never been back to the general area after, while Knox and his team had been dispatched to the south dealing with ISIS members. Before I posted this, I asked them about that night. It's hard to imagine a soldier of his caliber believing in such tales. I find it even harder as I write this to believe what I saw was real. But no matter how hard I try to come up with an explanation, I couldn't, except for the idea that it truly was an aswang, the legend passed down by our forefathers. Knox said to me in reply, "I told you before, you and I both know what the thing was." I go with what I see, and most of the time, I don't have the luxury of time to doubt whatever is in front of me. I don't know if I'll ever know the truth, and I can't be sure if I even want to know. It was Memorial Day weekend of 2021. The world was recovering from COVID, and everyone was looking to celebrate. That included my friends and me. Our friend George has a really nice big boat. Well, his dad has a big nice boat, but George gets to use it. The lucky bastard was born into a lot of money. We do reap some benefits from being friends with him, though. Out in the bay was a big boat meetup planned for Memorial Day, so our core group, Grant, Hale, and I, all met up at George's house on the water, and we took the boat out from there to meet up with George's other boat friends. There were a bunch of boats tied together in a shallow part of the bay, and everyone was hopping from boat to boat and walking around in the water with drinks in hand. I was getting really drunk along with everyone else, and unfortunately, that included George. No one really realized until it was too late that he had way too much to drink and was not okay to drive the boat back home. I told him to sleep it off in the cabin, so he went down to sleep. It started to get dark after so many hours of drinking and mingling with other boat people, and one by one, the other boats left. We were the last boat left, just the four of us. I went to check on George, and he was still knocked out. We had to stall for hours with each other until he finally woke up. He did seem more sober now, so he started to slowly drive the boat back in the direction of his canal. On the way, we noticed the lights of another boat seemingly following us. George started freaking out, thinking it was the Bay Police. He didn't want to do anything suspicious like speeding up or slowing down, anything that might draw attention, so we kept our speed steady. We made it to the canal, and he lives about 5 minutes up the canal. The boat behind us was still following us up the canal. George was really starting to freak out, worried he'd get a DUI and lose his license, and of course, his dad killing him. The canal is a no-wake zone, so we had to slow it down even more. As we went down the canal, the boat behind us was catching up to us. At this point, we were fully expecting the boat to be a police boat. We started discussing a story to stick to, that we took the boat out and just hung out on the bay. We started hiding all the beer cans, ready to lie completely about having had any beer. We got to George's dock, and he looped the boat around to a line next to it. He did it pretty smoothly for someone who was intoxicated. The boat that was tailing us the entire time approached, and as it began to pass us, we realized it wasn't a police boat at all. It was just a random boat. George said out loud, "Who the hell is this? He knows everyone on his canal," and he said he'd never seen that boat. As it directly passed us, we saw 3 men standing on the back of the boat looking at us. It was honestly in a very aggressive way. George taunted them and said, "What?" None of them responded. Their boat passed us, and they continued to watch us. While we were all relieved it wasn't the police, George was now nervous as to why they followed us all the way down the canal when they don't even live on this canal. I said perhaps it's someone visiting a friend's house for Memorial Day, and he reluctantly agreed and said, "Could be." He tied up the boat to the dock, and we helped the best we could. He said he'd clean it tomorrow. We all went inside his house. His parents weren't home this weekend, he had the place to himself. So we suggested throwing a last-minute pool party, but it was already like 10 o'clock, and there wasn't really any chance of throwing anything big that last minute. So the four of us went back outside to just hang by the pool, continuing to drink, with all of us planning on crashing at George's place for the night. That boat passed by the house again within maybe 10 minutes, and that's when we really got suspicious. The men on the boat again stared at us, and this time George said nothing. The night became a daze. At some point after this, my memory gets really foggy, as I guess I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up with extreme cotton mouth in the middle of the night. At first, I thought the unbearable thirst I was feeling was what caused me to suddenly wake up, but I was very wrong. I looked around the room and saw Grant and Hale on the couch as well, sleeping. I went to the kitchen to drink some water from the faucet like a water fountain. That's how thirsty I was. But in the kitchen, I was met with someone else, dressed in a cliché all-black robbery outfit, including a black ski mask, and he was clear as day holding a gun. I didn't scream. He aimed the gun at me and told me not to make a sound. It was an unexplainable feeling, knowing that my existence could have ended at any given moment. And everything would turn black, washed over my body. He said to me in a quiet voice, "Where is the owner of the house?" I whispered, "I don't know." He asked me where the owner's bedroom is, and I shakily said, "Upstairs." He had me lead him upstairs with a gun to my back, threatening to shoot me if I made any sudden moves or calls for help. When I got to the top of the stairs, I realized there were two men behind me, not just one. Both of them were in the same all-black robbery attire. I really didn't want to, but I led them to George's room where he was passed out sleeping. The two men shut the bedroom door and had me wake George up without making a commotion. George came to reality, looking around the room and momentarily freaking out before one of the men got closer to him with the gun in his face, telling him to be quiet. The man with the gun pointed at George demanded to know where the safe was. George's family is loaded, and their house is huge along with their boat, and it's common for rich families to have a safe somewhere in the house. George led the two men and myself to his dad's room, to a certain closet. At this point, they forced him to call his dad to get the combination. George explained to his dad that we were being held at gunpoint and he needed to give the combination. George's dad complied. The two men took all the contents inside the safe and put them into a bag. This included savings bonds, cash, jewelry, and various important documents. After this, they ran out of the house. We didn't hear a car speed away or anything, so they must have had a getaway vehicle further away, not on the block. After posting on multiple outlets, including the Ring Neighbors feature and reporting it to local news outlets, no one could identify the two men. I think it's fairly safe to say those men on the boat followed us to find out where George lived, since it was a very nice boat and they must have seen potential dollar signs. I'd never been so scared in my life. I actually could have been killed if I made one wrong move. It was around noon on Memorial Day of 2017. My car was in the shop for a few days, so to the outside world, it would seem that no one was home. I was sitting in the living room watching television when I noticed a shadow being cast from the window behind me. I thought nothing of it as the window faces the street, and our front lawn is not very big. To me, it seemed like someone was just walking down the road, no big deal. Almost simultaneously, however, someone passed by the window to the carport heading to our side door. I went to check it out, and before I got to the door, he knocked. When I answered the door, I saw him in a white duct-taped motorized scooter, now under our carport. He told me he had been walking down the road pushing his scooter and he was wondering if he could rest for a moment. It was a hot day, and I could tell he had been walking. I decided to give him a break and let him sit under my carport for a minute. I even gave him a mellow yellow from the fridge, thinking if he had a cool drink, he would leave as soon as he was finished. I returned to my living room. Then there was another knock, but this time on the front door. I answered it, and this guy was asking if we were selling a scooter here. I told him no, and he apologized and then walked off. I closed the door and looked outside the window and saw that the guy in the scooter was still there. At this point, I was really suspicious, as most people would be. I decided to make something up to get the guy to leave by saying my friend was about to be here and that he needed to park there. When I opened the door, I asked him if he was feeling all right now, and he told me he was just resting. Before I could tell him my made-up excuse to get him to leave, the guy from the other door came from around the side of the house. He talked to the scooter guy and said, "Hey man, I've been looking everywhere for you. I thought you might have been stealing these people's scooter." They laughed for a moment and then both walked to the street with the scooter. I closed the door and decided to watch them from my front window. They both loaded the scooter in the back of a big red truck parked in the street that was not there when I talked to the front door guy. The driver was staring at the window I was looking out of, and after they got in, they took off. I called the police, and an officer came over almost immediately. I live a block from a police department. When I told the cop about what happened, he told me they had similar reports of a guy with a scooter casing houses, probably thinking that no one was home for the holiday. He told me that I probably scared them off since I was home. Still, though, I'm very lucky that they weren't violent. Every Memorial Day, I think about what happened. As a child growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the local playground was a place of joy and laughter, a haven where my friends and I could escape the world's worries. But one summer day, that all changed. It started out like any other day, with sun shining brightly overhead and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, but as we played on the swings and climbed the jungle gym, a sense of unease began to settle over us. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling grew stronger, until it felt as though we were being stalked by some unseen presence. As we ventured deeper into the playground, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. And then, as we reached the old abandoned slide at the far end of the playground, we saw it, a figure, dark and shadowy, lurking among the rusted metal. With a cry of terror, we turned and fled from the playground, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced home. But even as we reached the safety of our house, we could still feel the eyes of the creature watching us from the darkness, its malevolent presence lingering in the air like a foul stench. In the days that followed, the playground became a place of dread, its once cheerful atmosphere replaced by an aura of fear and mistrust. And though we never spoke of what we had seen that day, the memory of the haunted playground would stay with us forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the borders of our reality. As a child, my family lived in a sprawling old house with a basement that seemed to hold endless secrets. But it wasn't until one fateful night that I discovered the true horror lurking beneath our home. It was a stormy evening, and the wind howled outside as rain lashed against the windows. With the power out and the house plunged into darkness, my siblings and I huddled together in the living room, our hearts pounding with fear. But as the night wore on, an eerie sound began to echo through the house. A soft scratching coming from somewhere deep below. At first, we dismissed it as the sound of branches scraping against the windows, but as the scratching grew louder and more insistent, we knew something was terribly wrong. Summoning our courage, we ventured into the basement, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of dread. As we descended the creaking stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around us like a suffocating blanket. But what we found waiting for us in the depths of the basement was far worse than anything we could have imagined. A creature hunched and twisted, its eyes gleaming with malice as it lurked in the shadows. With a scream of terror, we fled from the basement, the creature hot on our heels. As we reached the safety of the main floor, we slammed the door shut behind us, praying that whatever lurked below would never escape its dark prison. To this day, I can still hear the scratching coming from the basement, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. And though we have long since moved away from that house, the memory of that night will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that dwells within us all. New York City trains are pretty crazy. I've been groped and harassed, and I've seen things that I don't ever want to see again. My best friend and I were neighbors living in Upper Manhattan. It was summertime, and it was pretty late. It was around 8:30-ish, and we wanted to go to the west side to get some milkshakes because we always liked to go out late for little adventures. Of course, my parents didn't want us to go out late, but we kept pushing it, and we ended up going. In order to get to where we wanted to go, we had to take the subway. As we're coming back, it was already 9:30-ish, so we expected to get back home around 10. The train arrived, and my best friend and I hopped in. The train car was empty, so we sat on the chairs with 2 seats. As we arrived at the next stop, a man came into the same car. We didn't think anything of it until the man sat right across from us. Keep in mind, the train car was nearly empty, and he could have picked literally any other seat but decided to sit across from us. Of course, my friend and I thought that was weird, so we texted each other saying we were going to move to the next car when we got to the next stop. As we were heading to the next stop, we quickly ran out of the train and ran to a different car. We just kind of laughed it off until our smiles slowly turned into worried faces when we saw the same man coming into the new car we had just moved to. Obviously, my friend and I felt completely uncomfortable. We moved all the way down to the opposite end of the car, and the man did the same exact thing. Keep in mind, the man himself didn't look creepy. He looked pretty average, which honestly made me really surprised. But my friend and I quickly moved to the next car once we got to the next stop. We were pretty scared because we were only 15 years old, and we were females on a subway. Train going back home alone around 10 o'clock. I don't really remember how we lost the man, but luckily we did. We quickly ran back home after we got off our stop, also making sure we weren't being followed. We didn't tell our parents because we knew they wouldn't let us out again, so we just kept it to ourselves. Nothing crazy like this ever happened again to us, but now we know to be more careful taking the subway home. For anyone that comes to New York and takes the subway, please be careful because you really never know who's gonna follow you. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 13 or 14 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before co-lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long, in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward, though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get this stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way, but I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game, not too long after I sat back down. I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer at this point. I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "F this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit. When the doorbell rang again, this woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her, but when I opened the door there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied saying yes, she came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute. And again I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who he claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard, but when I went to the back and looked out the back window expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear blinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking onto the window stopped. By this point, this was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning I told my dad what happened. When I called him, he told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe. But it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door. My wife and I take yearly vacations to different places. It's our way of taking a break from regular everyday life as well as getting to spend some quality time together. This year, we had a cabin booked in Washington State. It was far out and described online as being quiet and peaceful, away from any other places or people. Most of our life is in crowded cities, so this sounded great for us. When we flew in, we walked to a grocery store to pick up what we needed, then took a taxi out to the cabin. We didn't rent a car because we knew we'd only be there for 3 days, so we wanted to spend it just at the cabin. If we changed our minds or needed anything else, we could always just order an Uber. The taxi ride was just over an hour from the town we landed in. Most of the drive was between huge mountain ranges and tree-covered landscape. It was really beautiful and got us both excited for our stay. Then at just about 7 p.m., we arrived at the cabin. It was completely alone in the middle of the forest. Even the driveway leading to it wasn't much more than some tire tracks in the dirt. We got out, paid the taxi, then brought our stuff inside. The cabin itself was small. There was the main floor that had the kitchen and living room, with a ladder leading up to a loft area that had the bed in it. The bed area on the loft was short, though. You literally had to crawl into the bed, kind of like one you'd see in a tiny home. Anyway, we unpacked the groceries and made a very quick dinner since we were tired from the flight. Then we opened a bottle of wine to settle in for the night. We lit up the fireplace and chatted about how we were looking forward to the next few days. It was around 11 p.m. at this point, and as we talked, we both suddenly heard something outside. Someone was walking in the grass near the cabin. It was loud too, like they were really close. My wife looked nervous, so I tried to put a brave face on and told her it was fine. I got up and looked out the window. It wasn't until then that I realized how dark it had gotten outside. I looked around, seeing nothing but large trees everywhere and pitch-black darkness around them. I told her I didn't see anyone, then went over to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch and turning on the outdoor lights. All I could really see out there was a small portion of the driveway, but I didn't see anyone there either. The forest was very calm and quiet too, so if they were still walking around, I felt like I would have been able to hear them. I went back inside and asked my wife if she heard the footsteps anymore, but she said the sound didn't seem to fade out. It just stopped suddenly from somewhere behind the cabin. My brave act was starting to fall through, and I told her to go up to the loft and stay quiet while I figured out what was going on. I went around and checked all the windows again, not seeing anything. So, I went back to the front door. I was preparing myself to go back outside when a sudden thump shook the cabin. I looked up at my wife, who was looking up at the ceiling. Someone was on the roof of the cabin. I stayed inside and called the police, going over lengthy directions on how to get to the cabin we were at. Over the course of the hour that we had to wait, we could occasionally hear a few footsteps walking across the top of the cabin. About 45 minutes into the wait, though, we heard their boots hit the ground, followed by them calmly walking away. I looked out the window once more, seeing their outline disappearing into the forest. Police took our report and gave us a ride into town, where we spent the rest of our vacation. What that person was doing miles away from civilization in the middle of a forest is terrifying, seeing as they were likely waiting for us to either go to bed or go outside. We're just thankful that we got out of there before something else could have happened. I regrettably used to work at a hotel in our town. Our town had gotten hit by a hurricane a few months back, and a lot of houses were badly damaged, so many people vacated the place. The hotel is about a 15-minute walk from my house. The town and hotel name I'll leave out of this, as I really just don't want anything traced back to me. The hotel was a very standard bed and breakfast type place, you know, where they serve wet scrambled eggs, frozen sausages, and assorted cereals. The hotel had a busy month after the hurricane, as some people were out of their houses due to damages. But after a while, things quieted down, if anything, quieter than before the hurricane. I always worked nights from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then someone would relieve me at 2 a.m., and they'd work till 10 o'clock or 11 a.m. I could always see how many people were checked into the hotel, and at the time, it was only maybe 9 rooms, which wasn't a lot at all. I could go the whole night sometimes without seeing anyone. There was a back break room for employees with a coffee machine, fridge, table, and a couple of sofa-type chairs. The employee bathroom was also back there. At night, I spent most of my time back there. There was a bell at the front desk that people would ring if they needed anything. I was in the back when I heard a deep voice from the lobby saying, "Hello," repeatedly. I got up and went through the door leading to behind the counter and saw a man on the other side of the glass. There was a glass barrier with an opening underneath about 10 inches high. He said he needed towels. I grabbed him a couple of extra towels and slid them under the glass for him. He grabbed them rather aggressively, shot me this weird look, then walked to the room's hallway. I stayed in the lobby, now sitting in the rolling chair by the monitors, and I just watched that man on the camera walk down the hallway. He was looking around weirdly, then he started rubbing the towels on his face. I said out loud, "What in the world?" Then he got in the elevator, so I went back to the break room. It was maybe 10 minutes later when I heard a voice again from the lobby. It was the same voice. I walked back out, and that man was standing on the other side again. He said very loudly, "My key card is broken." I asked what his room number was. He said it was something random, like 2C something with a letter in it. Our hotel rooms strictly had numbers, no letters, so I knew this man was lying. I told him, "Sir, our rooms don't have letters. Are you sure you're staying here?" His reaction was not something I was expecting, nor was it something I wish I ever had to be a victim to. He threw the towels on the floor, started smiling, and slightly tilting his head as he got closer to the glass. When his face was practically pressed up on the glass, he said, "I'm going to kill you," still with a smile on his face. Then he said it again, louder, and again. Each time he said it, it got louder until it was almost a scream. I screamed back at him, "I'm calling the police," and I did. I picked up the phone and showed him as I dialed 911. He kept his disturbing smile as he now started mocking me, calling the police. As I spoke to the dispatcher on the phone, explaining very loudly what was happening in front of my face. The sick man laughed and headed for the door in a slow walk. I told the dispatcher he was leaving, and when he was gone through the doors and out of sight, I said he was gone. She asked me if I still wanted an officer to show up, and I said no, it's all right. So the next couple of hours of my shift went slow. I decided for obvious reasons to hang around in the lobby now instead of the break room. There was one guest who checked in during this time. At around 2 a.m., my relief came, and I clocked out and was free to go home. I walked outside to the parking lot. It was cold out. I remember wishing I had brought my coat. I walked with my hands in the pockets of my light jacket and my hood up. Then I heard a voice in the parking lot. I turned around. There was a line of bushes that covered the first floor windows of the hotel. It came from the bushes. I don't know what the voice said. I didn't care. I walked faster now. Once I got out of the parking lot, I was on a main road for a brief minute, but there were no cars on the road in this quiet town at this hour. After a minute, I turned left down a residential street that would eventually turn onto my block. It was dead silent out, not even the sound of any distant traffic, just the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement. And then the sound of someone else's shoes hitting the pavement behind me, only it was the sound of someone running as if on their tiptoes, trying to be quiet. By the time I turned around, they stopped. There was a car right behind me, and I almost knew that there was someone hiding behind it. I heard laughing and then a familiar voice saying quietly, "I'm going to kill you." Without even seeing him, I knew it was that man. I looked around, planning out my next move. I couldn't outrun a man, let alone wearing my work shoes. I looked at the nearest house. It had an upstairs light on. Someone was awake. I would go run and ring the doorbell for help. I looked back at the car, and I saw him, that man, peeking his eyes out from behind the car as he inched around it to the front. When he got to the hood, the rest of his face and upper body were exposed, and I could see his disgusting, crazy smile again. I ran for the house, screaming, "Help me." I made it to the front door and rang the bell at least 3 times. That's when the man grabbed me and started choking me, whispering in my ear, "Die." In that moment, I thought my life was flashing before my eyes. Then an angel in the form of a man opened the front door to the house and screamed, "Hey," at the man choking me. The man's grip was released from my neck, and I fell to the floor. I never turned to watch the man run away, but the man from the house helped me up and brought me inside. He gave me water and called the police for me, and I explained the whole story to the police. They collected the CCTV footage of the man from the hotel and put feelers out to track him. I was called into the police station when they did a lineup of people who looked similar to the man on the CCTV footage, and I was asked to point out which man I thought was him. I looked at all 5 of them for like 5 minutes, and I ultimately said it wasn't any of them. I don't know if the pressure and nerves got to me, but in the moment, I truly didn't recognize him to be in that lineup. I hope to this day I didn't make a mistake and let that man roam free.